Hey everyone, welcome back to Seeking Witchcraft. I'm your host Ashley, and today I have on back return guest and my coven co-lead Azaizall from the Feast of Torches podcast. Welcome back, Azaizall. So glad to have you back on. And for those who don't know you, please introduce yourself to listeners.
Hello, I am Azazel, and as Ashley mentioned, I am her co-coven leader. And yeah, I've been in the craft for however much the math is between 31 and 12. I'm not sure. But yeah, I've been doing this for a hot minute, and I'm very excited to talk about our topic today, as I feel like it doesn't really get talked about too much in the craft community, or it does in weird ways. So yeah,
Great. Well, thanks for introducing yourself and thank you for agreeing to come on and talk with me as if you don't talk with me enough on our everyday
not
lives.
enough. We should talk more.
Well, today we're going to talk about familiars and spirit guides. And this is a topic I'm excited to chat about with Azazel, specifically because he knows a lot about this. And when I first got involved in the craft, up until honestly not too long ago, I would hear about people talking about how their pets were their familiars. And I had this preconceived notion about that being just taken way too much from Hollywood. So it wasn't really a concept that I super got behind or looked too much into. And I don't know, throughout the years, I've come to realize that this is actually not the case, thankfully. So I'm excited to dive into this topic a little bit deeper. So, just to kick things off, Azazel, what is a familiar?
All right, so a familiar is a spirit, and typically it's a spirit that you work with that's going to be assisting in your magic. And again, it's very simple. It is a spirit that you are familiar with. And you can have more than one familiar if you'd like, but it's typically recommended that you have enough that you can actually pay attention to, because working with a familiar spirit, working with any spirit, whether it's a spirit or a deity even like your ancestors, you want to make sure that you have the time and dedication to give them that quality time that they deserve. And so it's not really good to have 15 familiar spirits just to have quality over quantity.
So, it kind of sounds like familiars from your definition are like when people will need a problem taken care of. They'll say something like, "Oh, my family, we know a guy who can handle that for you." Is that kind of like what you're saying a familiar spirit can do, but on like the spiritual sense?
Okay, I never thought about it like that, but yes, your familiar is like your pepe, as we call it in the Hispanic community. Everyone has a pepe that can fix up whatever. And yeah, I mean, it's a little bit like that. A familiar spirit is kind of a spirit that you go to whenever you need either assistance or protection or something that you're going to be doing in your magical workings. And you want a little bit more oomph, or you want it to have, it's a spirit that you're giving essentially your magic to your spirit to carry out that type of working. And it can also be used for protection as well. And so typically you don't want your familiars to be something like your pet. I know it's commonly associated in the broader pagan community that a lot of people tend to associate, their familiars with their pets because, whether they're doing magic or whether they're doing ritual. And a
I think that's also taken a lot from Hollywood too, which is why I didn't really jive with the
Mhm.
idea because I was like, "Oh, what do you mean my cat's my familiar? I got her off the streets."
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times you do see, that those kind of associations in Hollywood, like, the classic one being Sabrina and her cat Salem. But I think the new edition of Sabrina actually touched on it a little bit better. Whereas, yes, Salem was a physical being, but when, certain things would happen, Salem did actually turn into a spirit. Like it was a spirit, it was a physical manifestation of the spirit of her familiar. And that's the way that they depicted it. And typically it's most of the time you'll see like a witch with like a raven or a crow or some type of animal that's like associated with them. But they're alluding to the fact that the familiar is in fact a literal spirit. But obviously, people tend to take that a little too on the nose whenever they see these depictions and think that, oh, my cat Fifi is my familiar just because it hangs out with me during circle. And most often than not, you do not want your cat Fifi to be your familiar spirit, because if there's ever a situation when you are doing any kind of working and there is any type of danger that is involved in the working that you're doing, whether it's protection or whatever, you want to make sure that your little cat Fifi is not going to be entangled in whatever witch war that you're being associated in, or whatever thing that is harming you or being cast towards you. You don't want your physical cat, your pet, to take that on and potentially cause harm to it.
So let me ask you this question, and this is going to have a follow up question with it too. But do you think that previous pets that have passed on can serve as familiars once they are in the other world.
For sure. I definitely think that that's a possibility, but it's something that you have to actively do. Typically it's something that you have to actively do. I mean, if it's a pet that you had a really strong connection with in your life, and their spirit tends to come to you pretty often in after they've passed, you can kind of work a little bit of magic and give offerings to them, whether they be treats that they liked in life, and work with them in that way, so that way you can continue that bond. I had a little bit of a connection with that with my cat Nix that passed a few years ago. She was very much active in my magical practice. Anytime I'd be doing anything, she'd always like pop up or just be watching from the corner, or even run around sometimes when I'm running around in circle. She was very active in the majority of my practice. 'Cause I got her not around the time that I started getting into witchcraft, but a little bit around the time that I started getting a little bit more serious into witchcraft when I was about 17, 18. And so she'd been with me the majority of my craft career. And yeah, so when she passed, there was a hot while where she would just pop up in people's dreams, and she'd just be like harassing anybody that like was in the house with me, her little spirit.
I remember one time you and I were on a video call
Hmm.
at your old place, and I swear I saw Nick's like run behind you because it was like very much a cat, but at your old place you didn't have your cats out like that.
Hmm.
Um, and I remember like I think there was somebody else on the call with us too or something because I'm pretty sure there was a third person who also said that they saw the cat, and I was like,
Probably
oh my god.
Tiana.
Yeah, I think it was Tiana from the Astrology Witch podcast. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. You know what? Yeah, it would have definitely been the three of us.
Hmm.
And yeah, I remember being like, "Oh my god, I just saw Nyx," and you were just like, "Where?" We're like in the kitchen. She's gone now.
Yeah, she did that a lot. I remember. I think it was like a week after she passed. There was we had a friend stay over, and she kept seeing Nyx in the room, and she had never met Nyx because like this was her first time visiting, and Nyx had passed already. She's like, "Oh yeah, there's this black cat that just like keeps like showing up in the room when I'm trying to sleep, and it won't leave me the fuck alone."
Oh,
But yeah, since then, she's popped up here and there, and I don't work with her like actively because I think I still kind of view her as my pet, and I wouldn't want anything that I'm doing, to haphazardly like affect her spirit. So I personally don't do that, but I know of a lot of people that do incorporate their pets after they've passed into their magical practice.
yeah, so I've thought about doing that with myself, and you know this story, so I'm mostly
Hmm.
saying it for my listeners who don't know this story. But I had a cat, Jasper, who we had to put him down when he was 4 months old due to something called FIP, which is like feline coronavirus, and it's inevitable. You have to put them down, unfortunately. And that was like if you've ever had an animal that like you just have that like soul connection with that animal, like that was Jasper and I. Like I've had other pets. I love my two cats I have now. I love my dog I had, but Jasper and I, like, we had that connection, and it was so heartbreaking to have to put him down. Like, I still get so sad when I think about it now, and it's been so many years. But there have been over the years till now, still today, that like people will see Jasper like around. Like I'm pretty sure you've seen him before.
Hmm.
He just hangs out sometimes, or he'll jump on my bed, or he's just like still very active and like lets me know that he is here. And it's not my other two cats because they'll also like look up and be like, oh, there's another thing in this room with us. Um, and I have considered it potentially petitioning to Jasper to see if he wants to work as a familiar in some way because it's been so many years and he is still hanging around.
Hmm.
Cuz so maybe he just wants to like do some work or maybe he just wants to say hi. Like I'm not really sure.
Hmm.
But like what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I guess you said like you don't want your familiar spirit to come into any harm, but in terms of Jasper, I mean, I guess he could say no. Like, I guess that's also an option. But yeah.
I mean, I think that you could definitely do that if that's the route you want to go, and it's not necessarily always a guarantee that, like, oh, just because you use them as your familiar, that their spirit might be harmed. Um, there's always, the possibility that you might have a great relationship, and it helps you build that bond with your former pet in, obviously their now new form.
Well, because you're actually the one who gave me the idea that he might want to be a familiar because this was a long time ago. You and I were talking, and there was something that you said that like clicked where he was in my life for, like, such a
Mhm.
short time, and at the time, like, I didn't really believe in familiars or anything, like, I didn't that wasn't really something I practiced with, and I think, like, you said something along the lines of, like, "Oh, well, what if he was in your life for, like, that short amount of time so you could get to know him before he, like, passed on, and maybe he wants to, like, do that or something," which, like, I don't know, that might be a morbid way of phrasing his very, very short life, but I don't know, like, it was just it's something that made me think about it in that way,
Mhm.
about potentially putting him to work, quote, unquote.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a bond that you could definitely build with them, and I think just doing that would just be like just starting off super simple and just like giving them offerings and making sure that they have a space on your altar or on a separate altar if you'd like, and just kind of building that bond and working them into your space. Whether you're doing like meditations or something, you want to be like, hey, Jasper, can you come be with me while we go into this meditation or this path working and just walk with me. And I think over time, that bond will build and you might end up learning a thing or two from Jasper.
Yeah, and I know we're gonna talk a little bit more too about a ritual per se of how to get a familiar.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. Another thing that I wanted to mention too is that while the majority of familiar lore or myth is usually centered around being a specific spirit, I will say there is a ritual. I want to say it's in the Key of Solomon. I'm not 100% sure, but there's some ceremonial working that you can do that you can actually consecrate your dog. It's specifically for a dog in this ritual to
Okay,
kind of like
really?
have them being like your magical partner in this working that you're doing, and they're there to kind of like as like another set of eyes, and if something comes in the room they can like bark or make you aware of anything that you're not aware of or something that they can perceive that you can't perceive. And I think that's not super common in the general familiar lore, but that is a little bit of an adage that you can include your pet if you'd like to, but typically I personally wouldn't recommend it, especially if you're doing some type of ceremonial working where you're working with either higher or lower energy spirits, and there's always a risk of it's not something that you might particularly want them to be involved in. But take it with a grain of salt. You do you, boo.
So, what have been your personal experiences with, like, working with a familiar in terms of, like, have you had any times where they have performed magic for you or done a protection for you that you're aware of?
Working with familiars, a personal familiar spirit, I don't have one specifically, mostly because I'm lazy and the time dedication to it. What my experiences with familiars is usually geared towards because I do a lot of planetary magic, and the Olympic spirits are seen, at least in my opinion, they're seen as mostly as more of along the lines of being like familiar spirits. They're not necessarily your familiar spirits, they're more of like the familiars of the planetary energies. So it can create a little bit of an easier connection when you're trying to work with planetary energies. You may not necessarily want to work with the planetary intelligence or the planetary daemon. It might be a little easier, and I find working with more mundane, like if you're doing a working for more mundane things, the Olympic spirits are easier to connect with because they have a little bit more of a connection to humans than the celestial beings that are the planetary spirits. So for something a little bit more broad, I would probably go to like the intelligences that's not necessarily so integrated into like a mundane life. Like for job working, like I would mostly work with like Ophiel being the spirit, Olympic spirit of Mercury, or something associated with love, like I'd probably go to Hagiel and build that bond with them. And I think it's mostly just because again, like I don't have necessarily the amount of time to dedicate to building that bond with that spirit, but I've heard of plenty of people who, working with certain deities or working with certain spiritual forces, that they eventually come upon a spirit that as kind of like an intermediary.
So, when you're talking about working with familiars and having to build up this bond with them, does that mean that a familiar could just be temporary?
For sure. Yeah. I think just like gods, not it's not always a lifelong dedication. Sometimes you can work with them for a specific goal, and they go back to the ether, or they go back to whatever it is that they were doing before. And it's not, you can, if you like, if you start that bond and you really bridge that gap with that spirit, and you feel like this is something that you would like to hold on to forever. But it could also be the case that you are doing a working that you have a specific goal in mind, and so you went to whatever god that you were doing sorry, god that you were working with, and you ask for help, and so they send you this spirit to give you that help. And then once that need is no longer there, you can, it's kind of like you can choose, like, if do you want to continue working this that bond with that spirit, or do you want to let it go and kind of grow your craft in another direction or move forward.
That's really interesting to consider because I was going to ask you if you think that everybody should have a familiar, but you make a really good point about you don't necessarily need to have familiars be your one and only connection
Mhm.
of working with spirits because you talked about the Olympic spirits and intelligences and are talking about working with God. So I think that's actually a really cool way to look at it. But on that same note, I want to ask though, do you think that obtaining a familiar is something that only quote unquote advanced practitioners can obtain, or is this something that anybody could get, quote unquote, as long as they put in some time and effort? And find a spirit to agree.
Yeah, I think definitely you don't necessarily have to be an advanced, quote unquote, advanced practitioner to work with a familiar spirit. I think that the idea of the familiar is can be useful to anybody in any part in their, or any part along their journey in the craft, especially at the beginning. Building those bonds. Like, yes, we can build those bonds with deity, and I think that can be a beautiful thing. But sometimes, working with deity can be a little bit too much, and working with familiar spirit can at least ease you into that connection where you're still kind of building that bond with that deity, but you're kind of working with a something that's a little bit closer to you, a little bit more tangible. I know a lot of people don't necessarily always go towards deity work because they either have a lot of religious trauma or anything like that, and so working with familiars can be kind of that bridge, and where you're not necessarily working with a higher level spirit, or whatever you want to call it, deity, or you can just go to the forest and work with the local land spirits and communicate with them and see how you can build that bond with them, and working with that familiar can kind of help you build that bond with the land that you're living on. So it doesn't always necessarily have to be with a connection with a deity. While that's historically how most familiars are obtained, it's not necessarily always the case. Another thing that I did want to mention is that there are different types of familiar spirits. It's not necessarily always going to be in animal form. A lot of times we do see the familiar, especially in pop culture, like we talked about before, as like being like a crow or a cat or some other type of animal. But historically, the familiar is kind of can be anything. So it can be it obviously it can be in the animal form. It can also be in the humanoid form. It could be in the shape of somebody that you knew in your life at one point in time that passed away. It can be somebody that's sorry. It can be a spirit that's part of the Fae. It can be a spirit that is you know doesn't necessarily have any quote unquote real mythological lore, but it could be like a griffin, or it could be a dragon, or whatever shape that or form that it decides to appear to you. It doesn't necessarily always have to be an animal, and so I would always be on the not the lookout, but be aware of whenever you're doing any type of magical workings, the types of different beings that do come to you. Because again, like you can do a working to get a familiar spirit, but they can also just appear to you during your craft career. And with that, the like I've mentioned before that like you can obtain familiar spirits through the act of like going to a deity, but traditionally it's a spirit that is given to you, and it could be the devil, it could be a deity, it could be the daemoness that you work with. And but traditionally, in I would say throughout the years, in like witchcraft trials or various grimoires and various books, there are a variety of different types of ways to obtain a familiar.
Awesome. And on that note, we're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, we're actually going to talk about how to get a familiar spirit. So stay tuned. Spark something uncommon this holiday season with incredible hand-picked gifts from Uncommon Goods. Uncommon Goods makes my shopping stress-free and allows me to find really unique and custom gifts that have all of my friends and family asking where I shop at. Whether you're shopping for your covens, Yule gift exchange, or your family, Uncommon Goods knows exactly what they want, For my partner, I found a few hot sauce themed gifts that I know he'd love. There's even a 12 days of hot sauce advent calendar that I know he'd really love trying out every single day, and this make your own hot sauce kit that I just know he would get such a blast out of. For the younger children in my family, or the children that my friends have, Uncommon Goods also has this woodland witch pretend playset that includes these little tiny tarot cards, a mini cauldron, and even a mix of fake ingredients to put in the included cauldron. And it's honestly so adorable and worth checking out on the site, even if you don't have any kids. It's super cute. When you shop at Uncommon Goods, you're supporting artists and small independent businesses. Many of their handcrafted products are made in small batches, so make sure you shop now before they sell out this holiday season. From holiday hosts and hostess gifts to the coolest finds for kids, Uncommon Goods has something for everyone. I love and appreciate that they are just so unique and that their products are not the same old selections you can just find anywhere. To get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/Ashley. That's uncommongoods.com/ASHLEY for 15% off. Don't miss out on this limited time offer. Uncommon Goods, we're all out of the ordinary. And welcome back. All right, so we started talking about it a little bit, but how do you get a familiar spirit?
Well, familiar spirit, like I mentioned before, is typically gifted from another spirit that you're working with, whether that be a deity or a spirit of the land. And it can be very simple. I usually recommend that if you're going to do anything, or if you're going to do a working to obtain a familiar spirit, I recommend going to a place that is sacred to the spirit that you're trying to gain the familiar from. Like, just as an example, if you're going to work with Hecate and you want to get a spirit from them, like go to the crossroads and do give them an offering and say, just like tell them what you want, tell them what you're hoping to gain from working with the spirit.
What if you don't have a sacred place for familiar? You just kind of see who's hanging around, or is that a bad idea?
It's not necessarily a bad idea. You can, do it in the comfort of your own home if you'd like. If there's no like specific spirit that you're trying to use as like an intermediary, you can, if you want to do it in your ritual space in your own home, and you're kind of just like calling out to not necessarily the powers that be, but the powers that are the spirits that are in your local area, and you're just like, hey, I want I need some assistance and I need some guidance. I would definitely be careful and do a little bit of divination here and there to kind of make sure that the spirit that you're working with is a spirit that is going to help you and be beneficial. We're going to talk a little bit about this later, but, call upon your spirit guides, call upon any of your ancestors or something to kind of like offer that little bit of protection, because when you're trying to call upon like any rando spirit that's going to be like in the area that you just want to obtain, I would recommend, having a little bit of a barrier and being a little bit more cautious with building that connection, because you never know, the spirits that are in the area. You could, I'm just speaking from random experience, you could necessarily live down the street from, a serial killer that died in a house, and you don't want to obviously bring that into your space. Not that I've done that, but I have been in people's houses where there have been horrendous things that were occurred, a couple of houses down, and
Thank
that
you for
did
clarifying that.
randomly appear. That did randomly appear whenever doing any sort of magical workings over there. So just be cautious if you're going to be working, especially like in your space. If you want to cast a circle, or if you want to call upon archangels or whatever to kind of like have that bridge of protection, because you can't necessarily always trust whatever spirit is lying around. As at this point in time, hopefully you've listened to the previous episode on Ouija, where Orly talks about just being conscious of the general spirits that are around, and just try to be a little bit smart with your interaction with them.
Yes. And on that note, we're going to take one more quick break. And when we get back, we're going to continue this conversation and talk about thought forms, spirit guides, and holy guardian angels. So stay tuned. Are you ready to face your shadows? Rue and Vervain's Earth, Moon, and Shadow Oracle is not just a deck for shadow work. It's an immersive experience brought to life by the visceral and hauntingly gorgeous artwork of Kat L. Amsel. Each card is a stunning portal guiding you deep into the hidden corners of your soul, helping you confront the shadows you've long avoided. Now, in its second edition, this deck includes 15 new cards, each intricately designed to reflect the depths of shadow exploration. And for those with the first edition, these new cards are available in a separate expansion pack to complete your collection. Alongside the deck, we offer the Into the Shadows, a path to individuation, a companion workbook crafted to guide you through your shadow work journey. Filled with potent rituals, intuitive card spreads, and transformative journal prompts, this workbook invites you to delve into your darkness with intention. Cat L. Amsel's artwork seemingly pairs with these tools, making the journey not just introspective but visually breathtaking. Explore the visceral beauty of shadow work with Earth, Moon, and Shadow Oracle and Into the Shadows. Embrace your inner darkness and step into transformation. Rue and Vervain Publishing, Beyond the Ordinary. Okay, and welcome back. So, thank you so much for talking about how to get one. And I know later on I'm going to ask you about resources. I know you have a really good one about
Mhm.
a ritual that somebody could actually use. We'll get to that a little bit later. But on this topic of familiar spirits and things that we've kind of mentioned before, what is a thought form and what is a spirit guide? And is there a difference between the two of these, especially with a familiar? And I have another one I'm going to throw out to you in a minute, but let's just start with these two.
All right, so spirit guides, familiars, and thought forms. Like, what's the big difference between them? So a spirit guide is essentially just, again, a spirit, and it can be, like I said before, animal, humanoid. It can be mythological or whatever. It's just a spirit that's kind of just there to guide you along your way. It is not necessarily a. It's a spirit that's typically always around you, and it's not necessarily one that you call or one that you are actively working with. They're kind of just there to protect you or be as a spirit that can offer advice here and there. They don't necessarily need to be something that you actively work with. Whereas a familiar is a spirit that you do actively work with. You do include them in your magical workings. Obviously, you can also include your spirit guides in your magical workings. And then a thought form is, while it can be used in the same way, it's not necessarily gained in the same vein, if you want to put it that way. A thought form is very much a something that you have created using your own energy, using your own magic. Typically in chaos magic, let's go with this example. A thought form is kind of like the second level of a sigil. So like there's different evolutions to it. So you would start a sigil, you would have the sigil for a specific working, and over time as you input more energy into the sigil, it kind of becomes its own spirit. At that point in time, it's a thought form, and so it's something that you've created uniquely for this specific act. Whereas it's not a spirit that has been, around, or it has an embodied, or it previously may have had like an embodied um, body. And so a thought form is, again, can be used for similar things, similar purposes, but it's more of your own creation. Whereas a familiar or a spirit guide is kind of just a general spirit that you incorporate into your work.
Okay, so let me then throw this into it. What about a holy guardian angel or an HGA?
So a holy guardian angel is something that's definitely talked about more in like the high magic, or yeah, I say more like along like the veins of like the high magic side of the community. Well, again, they it is something that you can obtain, conversation with your holy guardian angel. It's something that historically, like Aleister Crowley made pretty famous. If you read up about him, he talks a little bit about gaining conversation with this holy guardian angel.
Through
And I
the
wouldn't,
Abramelin.
yes, through the Abermelin, right? And there's various stories on how that has gone right or wrong for him. And while the Abermelin is a great method to go about having conversation with your holy guardian angel, I wouldn't say it is 100% necessary. While it can be definitely influential and can be something that can advance your practice a lot more than where it currently is, it is a very intense ritual.
It's
And
also not very accessible or something that most modern people can do.
yes, there's actually a book coming out. Yeah, I'm not sure when exactly it's coming out, but David Rankine has talked about releasing a book on working with different celestial intelligences and working your holy guardian angel in a more of a modern sense and giving you a little bit more of modern nuances to kind of guide the ritual to be able to do it in this day and age. Whereas it was very easy, I mean, it's not necessarily easy, but it was easier back then when we didn't have a lot as much commitment as we do in this day and age.
So, what exactly, or who exactly, or what is a holy guardian angel?
Your holy guardian angel is kind of your
You're like your
higher
fairy
intelligence.
godmother. Just kidding. Do
A
not.
little bit.
That's
I mean, not it's not your fairy
not
godmother.
not no,
It's
but also
not your fairy
no.
godmother. But it is essentially it's a spirit that's essentially connected to you since birth, and getting conversation with your holy guardian angel is something that, like I said mentioned before, can improve your magical practice. They're there to guide you. It is a being that, as far as I know, is typically an angelic or celestial being. and they don't necessarily always are owning your guardian angel. Like they are doing their own fucking thing, like around, and they're there just to like help you and guide you and protect you and give you assistance or give you knowledge and a variety of things that you were trying to do in your practice. They can also be, you can also go to them to kind of help bridge conversations or help bridge connections with other spirits, that can kind of be that again, that intermediary spirit.
It's interesting to hear you say that they can help aid you in your magical practice because most people, when they hear the term angel, they assume they have to be some sort of modern religion that's usually not pagan associated, very Christian, for example. So do you have to be religious for an angel?
No, I would not say you have to be specifically religious in, Christianity or Judaism or Islam, which are common, are the more common ones that you would associate with having angelic beings involved in their religious practice. Angelic beings are celestial beings. They're beings of the outer spaces, and they have been in and out of different cultures throughout all of human history. And the ways that are more commonly described now are essentially angels. In they have wings, or they're beings made of light. And most cultures have different representations of what those beings are. So no, I wouldn't say that you necessarily have to be of a specific religion to call upon or to work with your holy guardian angel.
So I went to the Sacred Space conference 2 years ago, and Devin Hunter had a presentation about working with different spirits and guides. And there was something really interesting that stuck with me that he was saying about working with angels versus working with demons or intermediary spirits.
Mhm.
And I hopefully will not butcher this too much because this was like 2 years ago. But he said something to the effect of trying to work with an angel is like trying to contact a fractal. They're so high up on the quote unquote food chain, like
Mhm.
busy working with the universe, that they don't really have time for humans and their problems. They kind of
Yep.
just they got their own shit going on, and they're not human. They're
Mhm.
angels. They are like these beings that we cannot comprehend. And
Mhm.
so he recommended working with lesser spirits, that are a little bit closer to our plane. So in his example, he was talking about working with demons, which is not what the Hollywood portrayal of demons is really like. But he recommended in this working with a demon or a spirit guide because they're a little bit closer to us. They're a little
Mhm.
bit easier to contact. They're a little bit more humanoid. They're not humans, but they're a little bit more on our dimension, on our plane,
Mhm.
versus an angel that is so high up they don't really give a fuck about what we're doing,
Yeah.
which was interesting to hear, being raised Catholic especially, and hearing about angels not really caring about us and our problems, because I was like, wow, that is the complete opposite that my my upbringing told me. But when he laid it out like that, honestly, it made a lot of sense to me. So take that what you will, that little nugget of information that I got from his workshop. But I thought that was incredibly interesting to hear.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about angels, especially when you think about them, taking them out of the context of religious iconography, angels are celestial spirits. They are
Be not
spirits.
afraid.
Right. They are spirits of the outer spaces, and to their varying degrees. Whereas there's kind of different levels. There are lesser spirits, or infernal spirits, or chthonic spirits. They're kind of all within the same realm, depending on what you really call them. That's typically where the daemons or the demons reside. Like chthonic is of the earth, so it's not necessarily they're in hell, or depending on which type of lore that you're going down, but they're typically spirits of the earth. And so those are going to be spirits that are the closest to what we understand as like energetically. And so celestial spirits, you kind of have to do a lot of purifications, a lot of abstinence of different of various things, because you kind of have to attune yourself to their energy. So it's kind of making yourself more cold. Whereas if you're working with daemons, it's kind of the opposite. Like you don't necessarily want to overindulge in things that make you a little bit more human, but you can be a little bit more raw in those spaces.
You're grounding yourself a little bit more to our
Yep.
plane.
Yeah, precisely. So it really depends on which route you want to go with. Both, I think, have their scary options. There are definitely scary angels that are out there. The archangels are ones that are historically a lot closer to humans. They care a little bit more about us, whereas like the different cast of angels. They honestly don't really give a fuck. They're there to do their job, and that's all they really care about.
I've heard they're also assholes to people.
They also tend to be assholes to people because, like, they will essentially they'll do whatever it is that you want done, and it don't really care anything about your feelings because they usually don't have feelings.
They will fuck you up.
Yeah. Whereas daemons, it's a little easier to connect with them. Whereas obviously you still have to be careful. There are certain daemons that are a little bit more aggressive.
And
In
sly and tricky
Yeah,
and
yeah. But then there's like demons like Stolas who will
I
treat
was
you
gonna say Stolas, that's so funny.
mathematics and
He's a little
astrology,
owl. He has got some
and he's
long
adorable with
legs.
those long ass legs.
He's so cute. Doesn't he
And
also
so
teach is it Stolas that also teaches makeup or no? There's like
no.
one that teaches, I think, like makeup and math.
There is Azaizall.
Okay, well, thank you for
He
that.
taught cosmetics, also witchcraft and like blacksmithing.
Maybe I'm getting confused. Maybe I was thinking of Azazel.
But yeah, so there are a plethora of earthly spirits that you can go to learn specific things and learn how to incorporate them in your space. But yeah, so going back to your Holy Guardian Angel, there is a movie that personally I love. A lot of ceremony magicians kind of hate it because it's not a great depiction of the ritual itself, but I think it's a beautiful movie in kind of loosely tangentially associating itself with the Abramelin.
I don't know if beautiful would be the
I thought
right
it was
word.
beautiful.
There's some scenes in that movie I
There are
wouldn't
some scenes in there
necessarily
that
say are
were
beautiful. There's a number of scenes in that movie I wouldn't say are
sure,
beautiful.
sure. And I don't necessarily agree with the ending, but I really enjoyed the movie. I thought a lot of the visuals that it was giving was beautiful. I guess would be a better
It
way to
was a
put
good
it.
I enjoyed the movie.
Mhm.
I just don't know if I'd use the word beautiful, but that's my own. Anyway, the movie is called A Dark Song
Yes.
for those who are interested in watching it.
It's a very interesting movie. Very loosely is associated with the Abramelin. So it's not necessarily an exact word for word or great depiction of the ritual itself. And I don't 100% agree with her choice in the end of what she chose to do at the end of the movie. And I won't spoil it for anybody, but that's just me because I'm a salty bitch and I would have gone the other direction.
And that's why you're
um,
named after a demon.
he is a fallen angel, technically. But technically, he's still an angel. I don't really think
So he's a
angels
fallen
fall.
fractal.
He is. He he's great. Okay.
Okay, so let me ask you, can you have a mix of all three, or I don't know, we've talked about a lot of different backgrounds here. Originally I was going to ask about familiar spirit guides and HGAs, holy guardian angels,
Mhm.
but we've also talked about Olympic spirits. We've talked about demons. We've talked about thought forms.
Mhm.
Is it possible to have a mix of all of these things, or would you say that could be a little too chaotic?
No, I don't think it could be. I don't think it could be a little too chaotic. I think that at first, if this is something that you're just kind of dipping your toes into, I would kind of start one at a time. I don't recommend to, go ham, go balls to the wall, and just like, oh, I'm going to do everything. You're going to find that you don't have a lot of time to focus as much energy on every single little one.
Yeah, how
So I
would
would
you even maintain those relationships?
not have a job, be rich. I don't know.
Do the Abramelin is what you're
Do
saying.
Yes, just hole yourself in your house for like 6 to 8 months, and
I thought it was a year.
depending on which version you read, yeah, there's like you would need a shitload of time and dedication to really build that bond to really actually gain anything out of working with these spirits. So I recommend to do one at a time. But once you kind of have that habit of working with that spirit, you don't necessarily have to be going ham every single day or every single week. You can kind of touch upon it more when you need it. But I would still do a little something for them every once in a while to kind of keep that bond alive, like you do with with friends. Like, yes, you can have that bond with really close friends, and over time you don't necessarily need to be talking every day to like still consider them being one of your best friends, but it's you still need to touch upon and touch base with them, and keep that connection alive every once in a while. Otherwise you're just going to fall to the wayside, and you're going to be more of acquaintances at certain points in time. So when you really need them, they're going to be like, why would I listen to you? Like, you haven't spoken to me in like a year. Like, I'm not going to do this thing for you. But if constantly keep in contact with them and stop making those faces. If you constantly keep in contact with them and have that bond with them over time, it's a little easier to kind of take some time to do other things and focus on other things. So I wouldn't recommend doing them all at once, but take it day by day and focus on one at a time and don't overwhelm yourself because you're in the end you're just going to be doing a disservice to yourself and doing a disservice to the spirits.
So I know with Akate, she does not like sharing her altar with
Mhm.
others.
No, she does not.
In a similar vein, do you think there could be any jealousy that can come between these different relationships you may have?
I mean, obviously it can happen. Every individual spirit is different and they all have their own needs and wants and desires. And there can be one that are a little bit more aggressive than other ones. And I would definitely pay attention to making sure that you are giving them essentially what they want in order for you to get what you want in return. Like there is the idea of like doing spirit pacts. Obviously this historically speaking, like a lot of people think about, oh, like pacts with the devil and these are, you're signing your soul away. Like that's not necessarily what a spirit pact is. You are essentially putting a contract together to say like, this is what I want out of this relationship. This is relationship because it's going to last like, so and so long, and I will give you this, and these are the terms that we're agreeing with. These are the terms that we're agreeing to, and as long as you stick within that contract, if they, since you it's essentially act with like out of bounds of that contract, you are more than free to break that contract and be like, you know what, you are not doing the service that I want you to do, and you're kind of being a little bitch about it, and so we're ending this contract right now. And I would ritually do something to kind of end that contract, and I wouldn't just like be like, oh, let me just forget about it, or because then it's going to fester and become its own little thing that's just like in your space because you haven't actually let it go.
Don't be what's that phrase? Like you have to be stronger than anything you invoke.
Right, right.
Then again, if you're invoking Hecate, then good luck.
Yes. Usually Hecate gets her way with, at least with me. I don't know if that has anything to say about me, but she definitely tends to make the space a little spicy, or just make my life a little spicy
It's
whenever
like
I
why Megan the Stallion? Pop in my head when you said that. Eh.
um yeah, it's like, so certain deities, they do tend to be a little bit more aggressive, but I wouldn't necessarily make like a spirit pact with Hecate. I would do it with more spirits that I don't necessarily have devotionals to, because I wouldn't necessarily make a devotional to like my familiar or do a devotional to my spirit guides, for example, whereas I would with deities, because it's a different bond that you have with them. Whereas like I am doing this in service of you, I don't necessarily want anything in return. Doing this to build my bond with you, and doing this out of love. I'm doing this out of a dedication that I want to my own practice, and I appreciate and love the things that you bring into my life. Whereas with daemons or with other spirits, I personally wouldn't do devotionals like that with them. So while I have a little bit more of a leeway that I can work with Hecate. So if she wants, her own altar, she doesn't want to share it with anybody else, then I will be a little bit more open to, not negotiation, but I'll be a little bit more open to doing the things that she wants, because we do have that kind of bond. Whereas my familiar spirit, if you don't like sharing an altar with another familiar spirit that I have, where that's going to be the space that I have, because I live in, a smaller space and I can't have 15 altars to everybody, then you're just tough shit.
So, what are some mistakes beginners may make when contacting these spirits?
I would say, again, just making sure that you're bridging that time, you're building that time and giving them the time that they deserve, or what you initially agreed to, and making sure that you're sticking with it. And yeah, I would just stick with your word, because at the end of the day, in magic, your word is all you have.
Kind of like in humanity too,
Hmm.
everyday life. Oh, cool. So, what are some tips for those who want to obtain connection? Like, do you have any resources they could check out or things they could do? Right off the bat, I can say meditation will probably be a
Yeah.
big one. Being able to distinguish the voice that you have, just your own internal voice, versus the voice from a spirit or a guardian angel or
Mhm.
a deity, etc.
I would say definitely work on your divinatory practices. Tarot and other types of divination can be great to really understand the other spirits. If you need something clarification, if you don't necessarily are great with like visualization, divination is something that can be very upfront and physical, that you can tangibly interpret. Or even using like a pendulum whenever you're working with them. I know not everybody is great with visualization and can have like these great ecstatic kind of meditations with the spirits that they work with. Yes, I'm holding an eraser. And um, I must fiddle with things on my desk while I talk. So yeah, like have something that is that can ground you to reality if you have a little bit of trouble until you can kind of build those skills in your, I guess, your psychic skills. So if you have a lot of trouble, interpreting either clairaudience or clairvoyance, or seeing spirits, hearing spirits, if you want to do automatic writing, if you have issues with that, I think working divination is something that can very easily be done at first until you can kind of learn to understand them better. And as for other resources, I would say definitely check out a BJ Swain's Familiar Unto Me, which is a great book. And I actually interviewed him on my podcast about a year ago, Piece of Torches. So please feel free to check that interview out. It was a great talking to him. And he has so much fount of information on familiars and different types of familiars. And a lot of talk about the Fae. Not a huge fan of the Fae myself, but there is a wealth of information on in that book. And there's also another book by Emma Wilby. I believe it's called Cunning Folk and Familiar. Or I believe she has a book on familiar spirits, if I'm not mistaken. And again, it goes into a lot of Fae. There is a plethora of Fae lore that's connected to familiar spirits. And I would say be careful with that but I'm just saying that because I hate the Fae, and so I'm biased. But yeah, there's so much history associating familiars and a variety of different spirits that you can work with in your practice.
Amazing. And Azazel, I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking about this topic. You are such a wealth of information and knowledge, and it's always weird to have my best friend on my podcast.
Oh, thank you. I know I ramble a lot, and my brain does not know how to do things cohesively.
No, you did great, but you already know what's coming.
Oh yeah, yes, I know exactly what's coming. I don't know if you guys
So,
have noticed. I edit all of the episodes for Ashley, and they're great.
yeah, so if any of the editing ever sounds whack,
Wow. I mean, that's fair. You can blame it on me.
no, you do great. But anyway, Azazel, what's one piece of advice you can give to a beginner? It does not have to be about what we talked about today.
A piece of advice that I would give to a beginner, honestly, I'd say trust yourself and don't get too caught up in what everybody else is doing. Focus on something that you want to learn. And if you don't know what you want to learn, do a lot of research. Do involve yourself in different types of practice. Involve yourself in different ways of thinking. I personally don't like the idea of pigeonholing myself into one methodology. Like, yes, I do practice Wicca, but that's not the only thing that I do. And so, like, do things that are a little bit out of your comfort zone sometimes, and trust yourself in the end.
I love that. You're making me think about how I've thought about this for a while. I really want to do an episode where I just take all of the questions I ask people at the very end about all their advice and just like put it into one giant episode. And it's just an episode filled with advice from people I've interviewed over the years. But I feel like that would only be interesting for me. So if anybody is interested in that, please let me know. Maybe we can make that happen. But anyhow, thank you so much, Azazel. As always, this was so great. How can the listeners find you on the internet?
You can find me on the internet on Instagram at Azazel, or if you want to follow the podcast at Feast of Torches Podcast.
And how do you spell Azazel
Oh,
for
right,
those who
right.
don't know?
I do spell it a little differently than the Fallen Angel Daemon Goatman. It is Azaizall. And again, you can follow me on Instagram, or if you want, you can follow my podcast, Feast of Torches Podcast. I do have episodes coming out soon. We did record one recently, so that is coming back, and hopefully I can keep that going a little bit more than I did last year. Last year
Woo.
was a bit of a whirlwind. You can also, if you want to reach out to me, if you want to email me at feastoftorches@gmail.com, you can definitely reach out and ask me anything that you may want to ask me. And yeah, thanks for having me on, Ashley.
Of course. And I will link all of that information of how to get in contact with you in the episode bio. So if your episode does not come out soon, people will know where to contact you to ask where your episodes are.
I will edit this as soon as I can.
And those who want to get in contact with me, you can find me on Instagram at Seeking Witchcraft, Twitter/X at Seek Witchcraft, even though I don't really use it. Facebook at Seeking Witchcraft Podcast, although I might have a backup page come out soon to be announced. So be on the lookout for that. I also have a Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the show, you could do so at patreon.com/Seeking Witchcraft. I believe Azazel also has a Patreon as well at Feast of Torches.
Mhm.
And yeah, those are some ways you can support the show. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening. And thank you, Azazel, as always, for coming on and chatting with me tonight. And happy Halloween. Happy Samhain, everyone.
Happy Halloween.
Bye.
Bye.